Have you ever thought about makeup as something more than just a layer of color on your skin? What if the very act of applying it could connect you to the gods, protect you from evil, and announce your place in the universe? Long before the age of social media and beauty gurus, the ancient Egyptians were perfecting the art of cosmetics with a purpose that went far beyond vanity. Imagine standing before a polished bronze mirror over 3,000 years ago, carefully tracing the dramatic winged lines of Kohl around your eyes, not merely to enhance your beauty, but to invoke the protection of the fierce goddess Hathor. Picture the vibrant green malachite and gleaming gold that adorn the skin of pharaohs and commoners alike, each shade and symbol a language of spirituality, status, and survival. These men and women weren't just wearing makeup, they were participating in rituals that blurred the line between the earthly and the divine. In a world where beauty standards shift almost daily, it's fascinating to realize how much we still share with those distant ancestors. Think about your own routines. Maybe you apply a certain lipstick to feel more confident before a big meeting, or use a specific scent to calm your nerves. For the Egyptians, these actions were magnified into something sacred. Their cosmetics were their armor, their prayer, and their identity all rolled into one. They believed a perfectly lined eye could ward off illness and evil spirits, and that the right pigments could align them with cosmic forces. This was a culture that understood the power of appearance in a way it feels surprisingly modern, yet profoundly mysterious. Their beauty rituals were less about trends and more about transformation of the body, the spirit, and one's destiny. So today, we're stepping into that world. We're going to explore the secrets behind those iconic looks preserved in tomb paintings and artifacts, the striking almond eyes, the bold contours, the shimmering skins that seem to glow across millennia. Were these elaborate routines simply about looking good, or did they hold a deeper, almost magical significance? Together, we'll decode the symbols, uncover the recipes, and meet the faces, both human and divine, that turn cosmetics into a cornerstone of ancient life. This isn't just a history lesson, it's an invitation to see beauty through the eyes of a civilization that mastered it as both an art and a science. By the end of our journey, you may never look at your own makeup bag the same way again. To truly grasp the power of Egyptian cosmetics, we must venture into their temples and their myths, for every pot of kohl and every stroke of paint was a direct echo of the divine. This wasn't about following a trend, it was about following a god. At the very heart of this ritual was the belief that the gods themselves were the first to wear these sacred adornments. The most powerful example lies with the sun god Ra and his daughter, the warrior goddess Sekhmet. In one pivotal myth, Ra becomes so furious with humanity's disobedience that he sends his eye, which transforms into the lion-headed Sekhmet, to exact his vengeance. She descends into a bloody rampage, threatening to wipe out all of mankind. To stop her, Ra devises a clever plan. He has the other gods flood the fields with a vast quantity of beer dyed red with ochre pigment, making it resemble a lake of blood. Drawn to the site, Sekhmet drinks the entire lake, becomes intoxicated, and falls into a deep sleep, waking as the gentle and benevolent Hathor, the goddess of beauty, love, and music. In this single story, we see the entire essence of Egyptian cosmetics. The red ochre, a pigment used on lips and cheeks, is directly linked to a tale of pacifying a destructive force and transforming it into one of life and beauty. The very materials they used were imbued with this mythical history. This divine connection was most visibly channeled through two of Egypt's most revered deities, Horus and Hathor. The iconic almond-shaped eye, lined with heavy black kohl, was known as the wedged eye, or the Eye of Horus. Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, lost his eye in a brutal battle with his uncle Set. The eye was miraculously restored by the god Thoth, and in the process, it became the ultimate symbol of protection, healing, and wholeness. By outlining their eyes in this exact shape, the Egyptians weren't just aiming for a stylish look, they were literally drawing a protective amulet onto their own bodies. They believed this sacred symbol would ward off evil spirits, prevent eye infections, and shield them from the harsh desert sun. It was a functional, spiritual, and fashionable act all at once. Alongside this protective symbol was the invocation of Hathor. As the mistress of cosmetics, she was often called the Lady of the Malachite, referring to the vibrant green ore they ground into eyeshadow. To apply green pigment was to call upon Hathor's grace, to seek her blessings of joy, fertility, and sensuality. A person wearing makeup was quite literally walking under the gaze of and embodying the spirit of these powerful gods. This emulation of the divine was not reserved for the afterlife. It was a critical practice for the living, especially for those who stood as intermediaries between the people and the gods, the pharaohs and priests. The pharaoh was considered a living god on earth, the human incarnation of Horus. His elaborate makeup, often depicted in statues and reliefs with impossibly perfect dramatic lines, was a vital part of his divine costume. It visually confirmed his godlike status and his role as the protector of the entire kingdom. During important ceremonies, his appearance was meticulously crafted to resonate with celestial power. Priests, too, adhered to strict ritual purity laws that involved specific types of cosmetics before performing rites or entering sacred temple precincts. They would anoint themselves with oils and apply certain pigments to become a clean, worthy vessel for divine communication. For every Egyptian, from the farmer to the queen, the daily act of applying these cosmetics was a small personal ritual. It was a way to align oneself with the cosmic order, to seek protection for the day ahead, and to affirm one's place within a universe governed by powerful, beautiful gods. The vanity case was, in truth, a portable altar. But to truly wield this power, one needed the right tools and the right materials, and for the Egyptians, the most essential item in any cosmetic kit was, without a doubt, the kohl. This wasn't a simple paste for aesthetic enhancement. It was a meticulously crafted substance born from the very earth of Egypt itself. The most common and revered base for kohl was a mineral called galena, a lead sulfide ore that, when ground into an ultra-fine, shimmering gray-black powder, created that intense, iconic color we instantly recognize today. They also created variations using other minerals, green kohl from malachite, and a darker, more sooty black from charcoal or soot. These raw materials were ground on stone pallets, often beautifully carved in the shape of animals like fish or turtles, using a small stone pestle. Water or oil was then added to the powder to bind it into a smooth paste, ready for application. The application was a ritual in itself, using a slender stick made of wood, bone, or ivory, often with one end carved into a delicate spoon or spatula shape. A person would dip the implement into the precious kohl pot. They would then transfer the paste to the back of their hand or a palette, thinning it to the perfect consistency before carefully tracing it along the lash line, extending it out into those legendary, elongated wings. This wasn't a rushed, casual swipe of modern liquid liner. It was a deliberate, precise act. The tools themselves were often works of art, buried with their owners to ensure they could maintain their divine appearance in the afterlife. These applicators and the small, ornate containers that held the kohl were personal treasures, reflecting the immense cultural value placed in this daily practice. Beyond the profound spiritual symbolism of the wedged eye, this dramatic makeup served incredibly practical, life-saving purposes. Living under the relentless Egyptian sun, the glare off the sand and the Nile could be blinding. The kohl, with its dark, pigmented base, acted exactly like the black grease athletes sometimes use under their eyes today. It significantly reduced the sun's glare, cutting down on reflected light and helping to prevent headaches and sun blindness. Furthermore, the desert environment was home to swarms of flies, which are not only a nuisance but also carriers of disease. The ancient Egyptians observed that flies seemed to avoid the areas around the eyes when kohl was applied. We now understand that the lead salts in the galena-based kohl are mildly toxic and have antiseptic properties, so while they believed they were repelling evil spirits, they were also, quite effectively, repelling flies and creating a sterile barrier that helped prevent common eye infections like conjunctivitis, which had spread rapidly in the hot, crowded conditions along the river. It was a brilliant, unintentional fusion of science and superstition, where the practical benefit reinforced the spiritual belief. This dual purpose is what made kohl so indispensable. A parent applying the dark lines to their child's face each morning was performing an act of love on multiple levels. They were adorning them with the protective power of Horus, appealing to the gods to watch over them. At the very same time, they were equipping them with a form of ancient sunscreen and insect repellent, giving them a tangible, physical advantage for the day ahead. The Kohl pot was, therefore, as much a part of the medicine cabinet as it was the vanity case. It represents a perfect snapshot of the Egyptian worldview, where the physical and spiritual realms were not separate, but intrinsically woven together. The line between a practical tool and a sacred amulet was beautifully, intentionally blurred. So if Kohl was the practical armor, the specific way it was applied, that dramatic, winged almond shape, was the sacred script. This design was far from arbitrary. It was a direct representation of the Eye of Horus, one of the most powerful and recognizable symbols in all of ancient Egypt. To understand its meaning, we have to go back to the epic struggle between the god Horus and his uncle, Set. After Set murdered Horus's father, Osiris, Horus fought to reclaim the throne of Egypt. In their violent battles, Set ripped out Horus's left eye, tearing it to pieces. The clever god Thoth, the deity of wisdom and magic, eventually found all the pieces and restored the eye, making it whole again. This restored eye, known as the Wedjat, meaning the whole one, became a universal symbol of healing, protection, and completeness. It represented the triumph of order over chaos, of light over darkness. But the symbolism goes even deeper than the overall shape. The ancient Egyptians believed that each individual part of the Horus eye corresponded to a different human sense and had a specific fraction value, turning it into a mathematical equation of the soul. The eyebrow, for instance, was thought to represent thought or intuition. The pupil symbolized sight itself. The curved tail under the eye was linked to the sense of taste. When an Egyptian priest or healer used these fractions in rituals, they were mathematically invoking the power of the whole, healthy being. So when a person painted the Wedjat eye onto their face, they weren't just drawing a line, they were methodically assembling this puzzle of protection, piece by sacred piece, calling upon each sense to be whole and shielded from harm. This profound spiritual practice was utterly democratic. Unlike the lavish gold and jewels reserved for the elite, the protection of the Eye of Horus was available to everyone. Both men and women, from the highest pharaoh to the lowest laborer, meticulously applied this style. For a farmer working in the blinding sun, the coal-lined Wedjat was a plea to Horus for strength and health to endure a hard day's labor. For a mother, applying it to her children was a tangible act of magic. A mother's prayer made visible on her child's skin to keep them safe from unseen dangers and common illnesses. For a scribe, it was an invocation for clear sight, both physically to see the papyrus and mentally to perceive the truth. It was this daily, personal ritual that wove the divine directly into the fabric of ordinary life. The power of the symbol was so potent that it extended far beyond the face. People wore the Wedjat eye as amulets made of faience, stone, or precious metals to be sewn into their clothing or wrapped within their mummy bandages. They painted it on the prows of their boats for safe passage on the Nile, and carved it onto their furniture and home walls, but its most intimate and powerful canvas was always the body. By choosing to wear the eye directly on their own face, they were doing something truly remarkable. They were becoming a living, breathing amulet. They were embodying the restored wholeness of Horus, carrying the promise of healing and the defense against chaos with every glance, every blink, every look they gave the world. It was a constant, quiet declaration that they were under divine protection, a statement of faith written in the most personal ink imaginable, while the dark, protective Kohl of Horus guarded the living. A second color, a vibrant and life-giving green, held the promise of what came after. This was the color of malachite, a rich copper-based mineral that the Egyptians painstakingly ground into a brilliant green powder. If black coal was for the sun-scorched world of the living, green eyeshadow was for the fertile, eternal world of the dead and reborn. Its power was intrinsically linked to one of the most important stories in all of Egyptian mythology, the death and resurrection of the god Osiris. According to the myth, Osiris was a wise and benevolent king who was murdered and dismembered by his jealous brother, Set. His devoted wife and sister, the goddess Isis, used her powerful magic to gather his scattered pieces and reassemble them, briefly resurrecting him long enough to conceive their son, Horus. After this, Osiris became the ruler of the underworld, the judge of the dead, and the god of resurrection and fertility. He was the ultimate symbol of life triumphing over death. Crucially, Osiris was consistently depicted with green skin, the color of new vegetation sprouting from the rich black soil of the Nile after the annual flood. His flesh was not the pale hue of a corpse, but the vibrant green of a healthy plant teeming with life. This association made the green malachite pigment sacred to him. To wear green makeup was to physically connect yourself to the regenerative power of Osiris. It was an act of sympathetic magic, a way of saying, as the god is eternally green and alive, so too shall I be. This was especially potent for ensuring vitality in the afterlife. Egyptians didn't just dream of a shadowy existence after death. They envisioned an eternal paradise often referred to as the Field of Reeds, a perfect, fertile mirror of Egypt itself where they would live forever in health and abundance. Applying green makeup was a way to guarantee your place in that blessed field, to ensure your own resurrection would be as successful as that of Osiris. This practice was not limited to the living. The ritual application of green pigment was a critical final step in the mummification process. Priests would carefully paint green stripes on the neck, the wrists, and the face of the mummy, particularly over the heart, which is considered the seat of thought and identity. They would also anoint statues of the deceased with the same green paste. This wasn't merely decorative, it was a functional spell. The green color was meant to literally pour the vitality of Osiris into the inert body, to shock it back into a state of eternal life and sensation, ensuring the deceased could see, hear, and breathe in the next world. They even placed small amulets carved from green feldspar, known as the Egyptian green, in the shape of the Djed pillar, a symbol of Osiris's stable backbone within the mummy wrappings to bolster this effect. The goal was a complete transformation, turning a mortal body into an eternal, divine vessel filled with the lush, unstoppable force of life. For the ancient Egyptians, a touch of green was the most powerful promise ever made. These daily rituals of personal adornment were just the beginning. When the entire community came together for great religious festivals, cosmetics transformed from a personal act of devotion into a collective, theatrical spectacle. The most significant of these events, like the beautiful Festival of the Valley and the Apet Festival, were times when the barrier between the human and divine worlds was believed to thin, and the gods walked among the people. In preparation, faces became living canvases for some of the most elaborate and symbolic art ever conceived. The Apet Festival, held in Thebes, was a celebration of the pharaoh's divine right to rule and his connection to the god Amun. During this event, the statues of the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu were carried in a magnificent procession from the Karnak temple to the Luxor temple. This was the social and spiritual event of the year, and participants engaged in full-face painting to align themselves with the celestial journey. The designs were intricate and deeply coded. A common pattern involved painting the entire face with a base of gold powder mixed with oil, symbolizing the radiant, imperishable flesh of the gods. Over this gleaming background, artists would use fine brushes to trace intricate patterns in deep blue lapis lazuli and vibrant green malachite. These patterns weren't random. They often mimicked the beaded net dresses worn by goddesses like Hathor, creating a symbolic mesh of protection and divine favor across the skin. The eyes, of course, were always emphasized with the most dramatic winged lines of Kohl, but for the festival, these lines might be extended further, curling up toward the temples and dotted with tiny gold flecks to represent the tears of the goddess Isis, a symbol of both mourning and rebirth. Meanwhile, the beautiful Festival of the Valley had a more intimate, yet equally powerful, purpose. This was an annual visitation where the statue of Amun would journey from Karnak to visit the mortuary temples on the west bank of the Nile, essentially a god paying a house call to the spirits of the deceased pharaohs. Living families would also use this time to commune with their own departed ancestors at their tomb chapels. The face painting for this festival was profoundly different. To honor the dead and ensure their favor and continued blessings for the living, participants would often use a base of white or very pale ochre, evoking the wan complexion of the afterlife. Upon this ghostly canvas, they would paint delicate, branching patterns in red ochre, representing the lifeblood of the goddess Isis and the promise of resurrection. Others might paint a single, perfect lotus blossom blooming on one cheek, its journey from the murky depths to the sun, a direct parallel to the soul's journey into the afterlife. The goal was to make oneself recognizable and pleasing not only to the gods, but to one's own ancestors, ensuring the community's harmony across the divide between life and death. These temporary artworks were far more than simple decoration. Each stroke of the brush was a prayer made visible, a direct communication with the divine. The community believed that by presenting themselves as living reflections of the gods, adorned with their colors, their symbols, and their radiant flesh, they would please the deities immeasurably. A pleased god was a generous god, one who would ensure the Nile flooded its banks, the crops grew tall, and disease was kept at bay. This collective act of beautification was a crucial form of social and spiritual maintenance, a way to reaffirm the cosmic order and ensure the continued survival and prosperity of everyone. The vibrant, painted faces moving through the streets in unison were a powerful declaration of shared faith and identity, a visual symphony of belief that bound the entire community together under the watchful eyes of heaven. But the most profound and final use of cosmetics was reserved for the journey that every Egyptian spent their life preparing for, the passage into the afterlife. This was where the ritual of the vanity case reached its ultimate expression, transforming from a daily practice into an eternal one. The process of mummification was, in essence, the most elaborate and crucial makeup application of all, designed not for a festival or a day in the sun, but for eternity. The goal was to create a perfect, imperishable, and divine body, a vessel that the soul could recognize and return to for all of time. And just as they did in life, cosmetics played a starring role in this sacred transformation. The preparation of the body was a meticulous, weeks-long process performed by skilled priests who acted as the ultimate embalmers. After the internal organs were removed and the body was dried with natron salt, the real work of restoration began. The skin, often shrunken and darkened from the drying process, needed to be returned to a lifelike, vibrant state. Priests would anoint the entire body with sacred oils and resins, cedar oil, juniper oil, and myrrh, not only to perfume it, but to restore pliability and a sheen of health. They would then pack the hollow cavities with linen pads and sawdust to give the body its former shape, reconstructing the form so the soul would find it whole and familiar. But the face received the most careful, reverent attention of all. This was the center of identity, the face that loved ones would remember and the gods would judge. It was here that the final, crucial layers of cosmetic magic were applied. The priests, using their finest tools, would carefully line the eyes of the deceased with kohl, recreating the perfect wedge-ed eye. This was not for glamour, it was a functional spell for the afterlife. They believed that in the darkness of the tomb and the duet, the underworld, the deceased would need this sacred symbol to see, to navigate the treacherous paths, to recognize the gods, and to behold the glorious light of the new dawn in the field of reeds. The kohl was a permanent amulet drawn onto the skin, ensuring the deceased would never be blind or vulnerable again. Next, they would often apply rouge made from red ochre to the cheeks and lips. This red hue was the color of lifeblood, of vitality, and of the powerful blood of the goddess Isis that she used to resurrect Osiris. By painting this color onto the lifeless body, the priests were performing a direct act of sympathetic magic, pouring the essence of life back into the vessel and invoking the promise of resurrection. Perhaps the most powerful cosmetic applied was the green paste. Using malachite or green feldspar powder mixed with oil, the priests would paint stripes on the mummy's neck, over the heart, and on the forehead. This was a direct invocation of Osiris, the green god of resurrection. By coloring the skin with this sacred pigment, they were transforming the deceased into Osiris himself, ensuring they would share in his fate of eternal life and renewal. The body was no longer that of a mere mortal, it was now a divine entity, ready to take its place among the gods. This final makeup application was the last and most important prayer offered for the dead, a visual incantation for immortality. This belief in the eternal need for cosmetics is powerfully illustrated by the breathtaking artifacts found in royal tombs. most famously in the nearly intact tomb of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun. Buried with him were not just grand golden coffins and chariots, but incredibly personal, intimate items for his daily use in the afterlife. Among these treasures was an entire vanity set fit for a god-king. Archaeologists discovered exquisite chests filled with alabaster jars, each meticulously labeled and still containing traces of their original contents: thick black coal, red ochre rouge, and creamy onion. There were intricately carved cosmetic spoons, likely used for mixing oils and pigments, depicting graceful swimming girls and animals. One of the most stunning objects was a beautiful headdress made of ivory, designed to cradle the pharaoh's head in sleep without disturbing his elaborate wig or makeup. These were not mere symbols or cheap substitutes. They were the real, high-quality items from his life, provided so he could maintain his divine appearance and perform his own rituals forever. The message is clear: the journey through the underworld and the eternal life that followed required the same tools of protection, divinity, and identity as life on Earth. The Egyptians left nothing to chance. By placing these practical, beautiful objects in the tomb, they ensured that their king would never be without the means to draw the Eye of Horus, to anoint himself as Osiris, or to present himself as a radiant, powerful god before the divine tribunal. His eternity, they believed, depended as much on a pot of coal as it did on a golden mask. Yet for all its divine and universal purpose, the world of Egyptian cosmetics was not a perfectly equal one. The rituals were shared by all, but the experience of them, the materials, the containers, and even the subtle nuances of their meaning could be vastly different depending on your place in society. Imagine the scene: in a cool, spacious chamber within the royal palace, a noblewoman sits before an ornate bronze mirror. Her cosmetics are laid out before her on an inlaid ebony table, a collection of breathtaking objects in their own right. Her kohl is stored in a slender, exquisitely carved tube of ivory or even solid gold, perhaps engraved with the image of the goddess Bastet. Her oils and unguents are kept in delicate alabaster jars that feel cool to the touch, each one designed to preserve the precious scents within. The pigments themselves are of the highest purity: the deepest black coal made from finest imported galena, the green malachite powder, a vibrant, consistent emerald hue, and the red ochre for her lips and cheeks, a perfectly saturated shade. For her, the application is a leisurely, luxurious affair, assisted by servants and performed with tools that are themselves works of art, like an applicator stick topped with a tiny, perfect lotus blossom carved from fan. Her makeup kit is a statement of immense wealth and refined taste, a treasure box that reflects her exalted status in this life and the next. Now shift the scene to a modest mud brick home shared by a farmer and his family. The ritual is the same, but the tools are profoundly different. The mirror might be a simple piece of polished bronze, or even a still pool of water in a basin. The precious kohl paste is not stored in gold, but in a small, undecorated pot made of baked clay or a hollowed-out piece of reed, stoppered with a rag. The applicator is a simple, smooth stick worn down from years of use. The quality of the pigments themselves would also tell a story of a different life. The kohl might be diluted with cheaper substances, or made from soot rather than expensive, imported galena. The green malachite might be a less vibrant, more granular powder, a sign of a lower-grade ore. Yet, this humble kit was no less cherished. It was still a sacred toolbox for protection and prayer, used with the same reverence and intention as the noblewoman's exquisite collection. The farmer, applying his kohl before a day in the fields, was performing the same act of faith, drawing the same protective Eye of Horus onto his skin, seeking the same favor from the gods. This dichotomy reveals a fascinating truth about ancient Egyptian society. Cosmetics were a powerful social equalizer in spirit, but they remained a clear marker of status in practice. Everyone participated, from the pharaoh down to the lowest laborer, which created a shared cultural language, but the elite used their lavish kits to reinforce their social power. The extravagance of their containers, the rarity of their imported pigments, and the sheer artistry of their tools were constant, visible reminders of their privilege and their closer proximity to the gods, whom they were literally emulating with their gold and precious stones. A pharaoh's solid gold Kohl tube wasn't just a container, it was a political object, a piece of propaganda that said, "I am literally adorned like a god because I am one on earth." For the common people, the symbolism was often more direct and personal. While the nobility might engage in complex theological symbolism with their makeup, for a worker, the primary concerns were often more immediate: protection from the evil eye, prevention of eye infections, and a simple plea to the gods for a good harvest or a safe journey on the Nile. Their makeup was practical magic for daily survival. Archaeologists have found evidence of this divide in tombs. A royal burial like Tutankhamun's contained chests full of lavish cosmetic sets. But in the graves of commoners, we find those simple clay pots, often placed right next to the body, a final, vital piece of equipment for navigating the afterlife. These pots were sometimes handed down through generations, their surfaces smoothed by the touch of countless ancestors, making them family heirlooms charged with memory and meaning. This universal practice, spanning every class, also tells us something beautiful about Egyptian values. It suggests that the state of being protected, healthy, and connected to the divine was considered a fundamental right, not a luxury reserved for the elite. The desire to present one's best self to the world and to the gods was a deeply human impulse that transcended social barriers. A queen might have her malachite ground by a servant and applied with an ivory stick, while a farmer's wife might grind hers on a stone and apply it with her finger, but both women looked into their mirrors with the same hope, that the green paste would connect them to Osiris and ensure their renewal. In the end, whether stored in gold or clay, the power of the pigment remained the same. It was a democratization of divinity, where every person, regardless of their station, could pick up a brush or a stick and paint their own piece of the eternal onto their skin. This widespread use of cosmetics across all levels of society leads us to a fascinating aspect that often challenges our modern perceptions: the role of gender. In ancient Egypt, the pursuit of beauty and divine connection through makeup was a remarkably fluid concept, entirely unconstrained by the gendered boundaries we often apply to cosmetics today. If you were to walk down a busy street in Thebes or Memphis, you would see a vibrant tapestry of adorned faces, and distinguishing a man from a woman based on their makeup alone would be nearly impossible. Both genders participated fully and enthusiastically in the ritual. In fact, historical evidence and artistic depictions suggest that men, particularly those of high status like pharaohs and nobles, often wore more elaborate and dramatic designs than women. This was because their makeup was not merely decorative. It was a vital component of their power, their divinity, and their very identity as protectors and leaders of the nation. Consider the most iconic images we have from this civilization. The golden funeral mask of Tutankhamun is perhaps the most famous example, presenting the young king with perfectly defined, heavily kohled eyes that extend into sweeping, elongated wings. Statues of great pharaohs like Ramses II or depictions of gods like Osiris all showcase this same bold, dramatic style. For these men, the application of makeup was a non-negotiable part of their public and ceremonial dress. A pharaoh without his characteristic eye paint would be as unthinkable as a king without his crown. His elaborate makeup visually communicated his role as the living embodiment of Horus, the divine defender of the cosmic order. It signaled his strength, his health, and his sacred right to rule. For high-ranking officials and priests, their makeup was a badge of office, a clear indicator of their elevated status and their ritual purity necessary to commune with the gods. This practice stemmed from a world where concepts of beauty, protection, and divinity were considered universal human pursuits, not feminine ones. The Egyptians saw the body as a vessel to be perfected and protected, and cosmetics were the primary tools for this task, regardless of who was using them. The fundamental purpose of makeup was to shield the wearer from physical harm like sun, glare, and disease, while simultaneously warding off spiritual threats like evil spirits. These were concerns shared by every single person, man or woman. Furthermore, by adorning themselves to resemble the gods, men were aligning themselves with powerful masculine deities like Horus and Osiris, whose very depictions required the iconic kohl-lined eyes and sometimes green skin. To wear makeup was to actively channel this divine masculinity, which was inseparable from notions of leadership, protection, and fertility. This stands in stark contrast to the gendered marketing and social norms that often surround cosmetics in many modern societies. The ancient Egyptian approach reveals a culture that did not equate cosmetics with vanity or femininity, but with power, piety, and practicality. A male farmer lining his eyes with Kohl before a day in the fields was performing the same essential act as the pharaoh in his palace. He was putting on his spiritual armor, ensuring his physical well-being, and presenting a face to the world that was in harmony with the gods. Their shared ritual created a common cultural language that bound all Egyptians together, transcending gender and, to a large extent, even class. It was a profound expression of a society that understood appearance as a multifaceted tool, one that could build a connection to the eternal, protect the mortal body, and announce one's place in the world, all with a single stroke of a Kohl stick. This remarkable dual purpose of Egyptian cosmetics, serving both the spirit and the body, reveals a layer of sophistication that goes far beyond superstition. While they believed they were applying the protective Eye of Horus, they were, perhaps without even knowing it, administering a powerful form of early medicine. The science behind their beauty rituals is as compelling as the mythology. Take their most famous invention, Kohl. We've already seen how its dark pigment reduced sun glare, but its most ingenious function was as a guardian against disease. The primary ingredient in high-quality Kohl was galena, a lead sulfide ore. To our modern minds, the idea of deliberately applying a lead-based compound so close to the eyes sounds alarmingly dangerous. However, in the specific context of ancient Egypt, this was a brilliant, life-saving adaptation. The Nile River, the source of all life, was also a breeding ground for bacteria. Flies swarmed in the humid air, and waterborne illnesses like trachoma, a highly contagious bacterial infection that causes blindness, were a constant threat. This is where the lead salts in the Kohl performed a kind of chemical magic. When mixed with the moisture from the skin and eyes, these salts release mild antiseptic and antibacterial properties. So every morning, as an Egyptian parent carefully lined their child's eyes, they were creating a sterile, protective barrier across the eyelid. This barrier actively inhibited the growth of bacteria that cause conjunctivitis and other painful, vision-threatening infections. The very substance they thought repelled evil spirits was, in fact, repelling the microscopic agents of disease. It was a perfect, unintentional synergy of belief and biology. The spiritual practice of drawing a protective amulet delivered a tangible medical benefit that reinforced the faith in the ritual itself. They didn't need to understand germ theory to witness its effects. They could see that those who used Kohl consistently seemed to suffer far fewer eye ailments than those who did not. But the Egyptians' cosmeceutical expertise didn't stop at the eyes. Their understanding of the healing power of natural ingredients extended to their entire skincare regime. They created a vast array of creams, salves, and pastes from the resources they had at hand, many of which have parallels in products we use today. For instance, they use honey extensively in their facial treatments. Honey is a natural humectant, meaning it draws moisture into the skin, and it also possesses potent antibacterial properties. A blend of honey and milk made a soothing face mask to combat dryness and protect against infection in the harsh desert climate. They use salts from the Natron lakes, the same salts used in mummification, as exfoliants and antiseptics to cleanse the skin and treat various conditions. One of their most common skincare ingredients was animal fats and plant oils like castor oil, moringa oil, and almond oil. These were used as base ingredients for perfumed unguents, but they also served a critical medicinal purpose. The desert sun and wind could easily chap and crack the skin, creating openings for infection. By regularly anointing their skin with these oily balms, they created a physical barrier against the elements, locking in moisture and preventing painful, dangerous cracking. This practice was so essential that workers received portions of fat and oil as part of their regular wages. For them, it wasn't a luxury item, it was a necessary form of protective health care, as vital as their daily bread. They even developed early forms of sunscreen using ingredients like rice bran and jasmine, which we now know contain compounds that absorb UV light. This holistic approach, where a single substance could be aesthetic, spiritual, and therapeutic, is a testament to the Egyptian worldview. They saw no stark division between the pharmacy and the vanity case. A jar on a shelf could hold a green malachite eyeshadow for a festival, a salve for a skin rash, and a sacred pigment for a funeral ritual. The same person who ground the galena for Kohl might also be the healer who prepared poultices for wounds. This blending of domains is what made their approach so innovative. They were empirical scientists in their own right, observing the effects of their natural world and experimenting with mixtures over centuries, carefully noting which combinations soothed, which ones healed, and which ones protected. Their beauty rituals were, in essence, a continuous, widespread clinical trial that successfully merged the desire for divine connection with the very human need to survive and thrive in a challenging environment. They proves that sometimes the most profound scientific breakthroughs are born not in a laboratory, but from the intimate, daily rituals of life. These everyday objects of beauty were so much more than mere tools. They were cherished personal treasures, often crafted with a level of artistry that transformed them into sacred relics in their own right. The vanity sets buried with their owners, intended for eternal use, provide us with some of the most intimate and breathtaking glimpses into ancient Egyptian life. Far from being simple utilitarian items, these cosmetic implements were miniature masterpieces, designed to please both the human eye and the gods. The materials chosen were as significant as the cosmetics they held. A simple coal stick could be carved from a humble piece of wood for a commoner, but for a member of the elite, it might be fashioned from gleaming ebony, smooth hippopotamus ivory, or even solid silver, its handle intricately carved into the form of a graceful lotus blossom, a protective wedged eye, or the lithe body of the goddess Hathor herself. These were not just applicators, they were powerful amulets, their very shapes invoking divine protection with every use. The containers for these precious pigments were equally exquisite. Kohl, the most vital cosmetic, was often stored in tiny, slender vases or tubes crafted from alabaster, a beautiful translucent stone that felt cool and smooth to the touch. More elaborate containers were made from faience, a brilliant ceramic glaze in shades of turquoise and cobalt blue that was uniquely Egyptian and deeply symbolic of life and rebirth. For the highest levels of society, these pots were made of gold and inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise. The choice of material was a direct reflection of the owner's status, but it also had a spiritual dimension. Using a vessel made of gold wasn't just about displaying wealth. It was about embodying the radiance of the sun god Ra, whose flesh was believed to be made of gold. Holding a pot made of gleaming faience connected the user to the life-giving waters of the Nile and the promise of renewal. Perhaps the most poetic of all these tools were the cosmetic spoon. These were not for eating, but for preparing and mixing oils and pigments. They represent the pinnacle of New Kingdom artistry, often carved from a single piece of ivory or wood into breathtakingly complex scenes. A common design featured a young, nude swimming girl, her body gracefully curved to form the handle of the spoon, while she holds out a duck or a basket of perfume that forms the bowl. Other spoons took the shape of a young woman swimming through papyrus reeds, symbolizing fertility and new life. These objects are so delicate and detailed that they could have had little practical use. Their true purpose was likely ceremonial or devotional. They were perhaps used during special festivals or as offerings to the gods, symbolizing beauty, sensuality, and the abundance of nature. To own such an object was to possess a piece of living art, a daily reminder of the grace and beauty one sought to cultivate. But the sacred nature of these items went even deeper than their beautiful forms. Many were inscribed with prayers, the names of gods, or protective spells, directly turning the act of reaching for one's makeup into a spoken or silent invocation. A noblewoman picking up her ivory coal tube might see a delicate inscription along its side reading, "May Hathor grant favor to the mistress of the house," or "protected by the Eye of Horus." A cosmetic palette used for grinding minerals might be dedicated to Hathor, Lady of the Malachite. These inscriptions blurred the line between a personal belonging and a temple offering. They meant that the very tool that applied the protective symbol was itself protected, creating a powerful loop of divine energy. Using an inscribed object was an act of piety, a constant reinforcement of one's faith with every stroke. This practice ensured that the rituals of the temple were seamlessly integrated into the most personal moments of daily life within the home. When these cherished items were finally placed in a tomb, their significance was magnified for eternity. They were not just sentimental tokens left behind, they were functional equipment for the afterlife, provided so the deceased could continue their sacred rituals before the gods. The exquisite craftsmanship ensured they would be fitting for eternal use in the glorious field of reeds. The inscriptions on them served as permanent prayers etched into eternity. Finding these objects in tombs today, from the grand golden chest of Tutankhamun to the simple reed coal pots in a commoner's grave, speaks to a universal and deeply held belief. It was a belief that identity, protection, and divinity were not just abstract concepts, but things that could be held in the hand, applied to the skin, and carried in the heart forever. While the vibrant pigments of Kohl and malachite captured the eye, another, more ethereal layer of the Egyptian beauty ritual wafted through the air, appealing directly to the nose and the soul. The ancient Egyptians were master perfumers, and their use of scented oils and unguents was every bit as sophisticated and spiritually significant as their iconic eye makeup. For them, fragrance was not a mere accessory, it was a direct conduit to the divine, a tool for purification, and a critical element of daily health. In the dry, hot climate, the first step of any grooming ritual was anointing the body with oil, but this was not a simple moisturizer. These oils, thick and unperfumed, acted as a protective barrier against the relentless sun and desiccating winds, preventing the skin from cracking and becoming vulnerable to infection. Yet, to use plain oil was unthinkable, for it was the sacred aromatic blends that transformed this practical act into a spiritual offering. The most coveted scents were derived from nature's most precious resources. Imagine the intoxicating aroma of the blue lotus lily, a flower that opened its petals each morning to the rising sun, symbolizing creation and rebirth. Its fragrance was painstakingly extracted by steeping the blossoms in high-quality oils, creating a luxurious perfume that was believed to induce a state of mild euphoria and divine connection. Then there were the rich, complex resins, frankincense with its sharp, clean aroma, and myrrh with its deep, smoky sweetness. These were not native to Egypt, but were imported at great cost from the mysterious land of Punt, making them incredibly valuable. The Egyptians understood these scents were the literal sweat of the gods, exuded by divine beings, and therefore the highest form of offering one could make. To wear a perfume infused with frankincense was to envelop oneself in the very essence of divinity. The creation of these sacred perfumes was a precise science, almost an alchemy, detailed in temple inscriptions and medical papyri like the famous Ebers papyrus. One of the most revered recipes was for a compound known as kaifi, a complex incense and perfume blend. The recipe was so sacred, it was often carved directly onto temple walls. To make kaifi, priests and perfumers would combine a multitude of ingredients: raisins, wine, honey, pine resin, cinnamon, aspalathus, camel grass, mint, juniper berries, and of course, frankincense and myrrh. This mixture was then slowly cooked, fermented, and molded into cakes or balls that could be burned as incense or dissolved in oil to create a potent, all-purpose unguent. The process was a ritual in itself, accompanied by specific prayers and performed at certain hours of the day to align with cosmic forces. The resulting fragrance was meant to please the gods, purify the air of evil spirits, calm the mind, and heal the body all at once. This connection between pleasing scent and divine favor was acted out in the most important ceremonies. Each day, in the dark, holy sanctum of a temple, the high priest would perform the ritual of awakening the god. After purifying himself with natron salt and water, he would break the seal on the shrine housing the cult statue. His first act upon opening the doors was to present offerings of food and drink. But his second act was almost always to offer incense, wafting the smoke from a censer over the statue to purify it and make it a fitting vessel for the god's spirit. The god, believed to actually inhale the scent and be nourished by it, would be pleased by this offering and in turn bless the people of Egypt. This same principle applied to the individual. When a person anointed themselves with the god's favorite scent, they were making themselves a pleasing offering, a walking, breathing embodiment of something the deities desired. A noblewoman perfumed with lotus was aligning herself with the goddess Hathor. A priest anointed with Kaif was preparing his own body to be as pure and inviting as the temple sanctuary itself. The use of these fragrances extended seamlessly into the realm of medicine and burial. The same Kaifai recipe used in temples was also prescribed for ailments ranging from asthma to anxiety to be inhaled or applied topically. The antibacterial properties of resins like myrrh made them effective ingredients in salves for wounds, and in death, the commitment of fragrance reached its peak. The body was anointed with vast quantities of the most precious oils and resins during the mummification process. The smell of myrrh and cedar oil would have been overwhelming in the embalmer's workshop, serving the dual purpose of masking the scent of decay and, more importantly, spiritually transforming the deceased. The goal was to make the mummy smell like a god, specifically like Osiris, who is said to be perfumed with the sweat of Ra. A well-anointed body was a sanctified body, ready for judgment and eternity. Thus, from the cradle to the grave and beyond, life was a fragrant journey, each sent a note in an eternal prayer for health, protection, and divine grace. While the face was a canvas for divine symbols, and the skin was anointed with sacred oils, the ancient Egyptians extended their rituals of adornment upward to the very crown of the head. Hair was not merely a feature to be maintained, it was a dynamic element of identity, deeply entangled with concepts of hygiene, social status, and spirituality. In a culture that prized cleanliness as a form of piety, the management of hair became a fascinating blend of the intensely practical and the profoundly symbolic. The hot, sandy environment and the ever-present threat of lice made long, natural hair impractical for daily life. The ingenious solution, adopted by both men and women across all social classes, was to shave the head completely and then wear a wig. This was not an attempt to conceal baldness, but a deliberate, sophisticated choice for health and elegance. A shaved head under a wig was far cooler, easier to keep clean, and entirely free of pests. It was the ultimate in practical luxury, allowing a person to remain ritually pure and physically comfortable while presenting an image of impeccable, polished beauty. The wigs themselves were extraordinary creations, far more than simple hairpieces. Crafted from human hair, sheep's wool, or even plant fibers like palm leaf, they were intricate works of art. Wig makers, highly skilled artisans, would carefully curl and braid the hair using a mixture of beeswax and resin to hold elaborate styles in place for extended periods. The wealthier the individual, the more elaborate the wig. A commoner might own a simple, short cap of curled wool, while a noblewoman could possess a towering, heavy piece made of thousands of finely braided human hair strands, interwoven with golden threads and tiny beads of faience or gold. These elite wigs were often so dense and complex that they required their own dedicated stand for storage when not in use. The styles were dramatic and highly structured, featuring hundreds of tight braids, intricate layered curls, or the famous tripartite style, a long, heavy wig divided into 3 sections, 2 that fell over the chest and 1 down the back. The weight and formality of these wigs conveyed an air of immovable dignity and immense social power. Beyond mere fashion, specific hairstyles served as a clear visual language, communicating one's role in society and relationship with the divine. This was perhaps most strictly observed by the priesthood. To serve in the inner sanctums of the temples, priests were required to maintain an extreme state of ritual purity. This included the removal of all body hair, a practice that extended to shaving their entire bodies, including their eyebrows and eyelashes, every 3rd day. Their scalps were always clean-shaven beneath their wigs. This rigorous grooming was not about aesthetics. It was a form of asceticism, a rejection of the animalistic and mortal self to become a perfectly clean vessel, untainted by even a single louse or speck of dirt worthy of approaching the god. For certain rituals, a priest would don a specific stark wig, often of a simple, short style, to further separate his sanctified temple identity from his everyday life. Hairstyles also broadcasted personal milestones. Young children, for instance, typically had their heads shaved except for a single long lock of hair, known as the side lock of youth, which was braided and worn to the side. This distinctive look immediately identified them as children and was associated with the child god Horus the Younger. Upon reaching puberty, this lock would be cut off in a coming-of-age ceremony. For women, hairstyles could denote their marital status. Elaborate, long braids adorned with beads might be worn by a young, unmarried woman, while a married woman might cover her hair with a net-like cap or a more subdued wig. Even in death, hair remained a crucial identifier. A woman buried with a long, flowing wig was making a final statement about her fertility and vitality, while a man buried with a ceremonial beard, a divine attribute of the gods, was asserting his hope to be reborn among them. Maintaining the health and luster of this hair, whether natural or adorned, was a daily ritual in itself. The harsh Egyptian climate was brutal on hair, leading to dryness and breakage. To combat this, both men and women liberally applied rich, fragrant oils and fatty pomades. Castor oil, moringa oil, and almond oil were popular choices, massaged into the scalp to stimulate growth and into the hair strands themselves to add shine, pliability, and a delightful fragrance. These oils also served a practical purpose by helping to hold intricate styles in place. For those with natural hair, these treatments were essential for health. For wig wearers, they kept the expensive pieces looking glossy and vibrant. A head of gleaming, sweet-smelling hair, whether one's own or artfully constructed, was the final, crowning touch of an ancient Egyptian's daily transformation, a perfect fusion of earthly care and celestial aspiration. Now let's turn our attention to one of the most intimate and essential tools in this entire ritual, the mirror. Before the era of flawless glass reflections, the ancient Egyptian mirror was a masterpiece of metalworking and spiritual engineering. Crafted from highly polished copper or bronze, these mirrors were not the clear, sharp images we know today. Instead, they offered a warm, slightly wavering reflection, a dreamlike glimpse of oneself that must have felt both personal and mysteriously otherworldly. The disc, or reflecting surface, was typically round and painstakingly hammered and polished to achieve the highest possible shine. This disc was then mounted on a handle, which itself was a canvas for incredible artistry. These handles were often carved from wood, ivory, or faience into the shape of a papyrus stalk, a lotus blossom, or most significantly, the form of a deity. The most common of these was the goddess Hathor, the very mistress of cosmetics, her benevolent face smiling up at the user as they gazed upon their own. This design was no accident. It directly connected the act of looking at oneself to the gaze of the divine. The shape of the mirror itself held profound cosmic significance. That round, gleaming disc of polished metal was a direct allusion to the sun itself. In the Egyptian worldview, the sun god Ra was the greatest of the deities, the creator and sustainer of all life. Each day, he was reborn at dawn, traveled across the sky, and descended into the underworld at night, only to be regenerated and rise again. The mirror, with its circular, shining face, was a miniature, handheld version of the sun. To hold a mirror was to hold a piece of Ra's power in your hands. The act of polishing it to a high shine was, in a sense, a devotional act, ensuring it could properly capture and reflect the sun's radiant light. When an Egyptian looked into this disc, they weren't just checking their makeup. They were aligning their own visage with the luminous, life-giving power of the sun god. They were ensuring that their face, like the sun, was ordered, beautiful, and radiant, a perfect reflection of the divine cosmos. This connection makes the mirror far more than a simple vanity tool. It was a sacred object, a potential portal between the earthly and the divine. The concept of a reflection was deeply intertwined with ideas of the soul. The Egyptians believed in multiple aspects of the soul, one of which was the kabit, or shadow, which was thought to have a separate existence. Your reflection was not just light bouncing off a surface. It was a tangible part of your identity and spirit. Gazing into a mirror could therefore be a meditative, even dangerous, act. It was a moment of confronting one's own soul, and through the symbol of the sun disk, and the carved image of a god, potentially glimpsing the divine. The mirror did not just show you what you looked like, it showed you who you could be, a being transformed through ritual into an entity worthy of standing before the gods. This is why mirrors have been found in temple treasuries, dedicated as votive offerings to deities like Hathor. They were among the most appropriate gifts one could give a god, a symbol of light, perception, and the very act of looking. This sacred role explains why mirrors were considered absolutely essential for the journey into the afterlife. We have found countless mirrors buried in tombs, placed right beside the body or within cosmetic chests. Their presence there goes far beyond a simple practical concern of wanting to look presentable for eternity. It served a critical spiritual purpose, self-recognition. The afterlife was a dangerous landscape, and the soul, or Ba, had to be able to recognize its own body, the Khat, to return to it each night for rejuvenation. After the traumatic process of death and the disorienting journey through the underworld, the soul might struggle to find its home. A mirror placed in the tomb provided a vital tool for this reconnection. The soul could look into the mirror and see its own reflection, confirming its identity and anchoring itself to the mummified body. It was a tool for reintegration, a way for the fractured parts of the self to become whole again in the new eternal life. For the elite, these funerary mirrors were objects of incredible beauty and value. Queen Hetepher's, mother of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, was buried with a stunning silver mirror, a metal even more rare and precious than gold in ancient Egypt. Its handle was a simple but elegant design of papyrus umbels, symbolizing new life and resurrection. For a common person, the mirror might be a smaller, simpler bronze disc with a plain wooden handle, but its function was identical. It was a non-negotiable item, as important as a shabdi doll or a heart scarab. In the field of reeds, you would need to see your own face, to know yourself, and to present yourself to the gods in the same perfected state you did in life. The mirror guaranteed that ability. It was the ultimate tool of self-assurance, ensuring that one's identity from the perfectly applied Kohl lines to the very essence of the soul would remain intact, recognized, and radiant for all eternity. This profound connection between the physical and spiritual realms finds its most potent expression in the belief that these daily rituals served as a literal shield against one of the greatest fears in the ancient world, the evil eye. This wasn't a vague superstition, but a deeply ingrained cultural certainty that envy, malice, or even an unintentional glance from someone of great power could unleash misfortune, illness, or catastrophe. The dramatic, almond-shaped eye makeup was the first and most crucial line of defense in this invisible war. By transforming their own eyes into the sacred wedged Eye of Horus, they were not just seeking general protection, they were actively reflecting harmful intentions back onto the sender. It was a form of spiritual armor, turning the most vulnerable part of the body, the window to the soul, into an impenetrable fortress. The application process itself was a magical operation, often accompanied by whispered spells and incantations meant to activate the pigment's power. We have evidence of these spells from various magical papyri and inscriptions. A person might dip their Kohl stick into the pot and murmur a short hymn to Hathor, asking for her grace to make them beautiful and therefore immune to the curses of the envious. Or they might recite a protective charm directly over the Kohl paste itself, something like, "I anoint my eyes with the Eye of Horus, so that the sight of the enemy may be blinded, so that the evil glance may not touch me." For a parent applying Kohl to a child, the act was filled with this protective intention, a silent prayer that the dark lines would make their child invisible to spirits that might bring fever or misfortune. This transformed the mundane act into a powerful ritual of benediction. This defensive strategy extended far beyond the face. The same protective symbols were woven into the very fabric of daily life. People wore amulets carved in the shape of the wedged eye, made from blue faience or precious stones, strung on linen cord and hung around the neck or tied to the wrist. They painted the symbol on the prows of their boats to ensure safe passage on the Nile, believing it would ward off storms and river demons. They carved it into the lintels of their doorways and onto the headrests of their beds to create a protective barrier around their homes and their sleep. A mother might even draw a small, discreet wedgette eye in henna on her child's palm or the sole of their foot, a hidden shield for when they were out of her sight. Everywhere one looked, the divine eye was watching back, guarding against the unseen dangers that lurked in every shadow. In death, this need for protection became even more critical as the soul embarked on its most perilous journey through the underworld. The funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead, are filled with spells specifically designed to ward off evil forces that the deceased might encounter. Spell 150 often instructs that a wedgette eye amulet made of gold or lapis lazuli be placed on the mummy's throat to protect it from decapitation by demons. The final application of Kohl by the embalming priests was the last layer of this spiritual armor, ensuring the deceased would not be blinded or tricked by malevolent entities, but would see the path to paradise clearly. The cosmetics buried with them were therefore not optional extras. They were essential supplies for navigating a landscape where envy and malice took on monstrous, tangible forms, and the only protection was a perfectly painted eye and a heart full of magic. Within the sacred confines of the temple, the ritual application of cosmetics transcended personal devotion and became a matter of state importance, a required uniform for those who served as direct intermediaries to the gods. For the priests and priestesses of ancient Egypt, their adorned appearance was not a matter of choice, but a strict religious obligation, a vital component in the delicate machinery that maintained the universe itself. Before any ceremony could begin, they underwent elaborate purification rites that went far beyond a simple bath. This process, designed to achieve a state of ritual purity known as wab, involved fasting, abstaining from certain foods like fish which were considered unclean, and shaving every hair from their body's head, eyebrows, eyelashes, and all. This radical act of denuding was the ultimate rejection of the mortal animal self, creating a blank, smooth canvas upon which the divine could be written. Only on this perfectly cleansed slate could the sacred cosmetics then be applied, transforming the human priest into a vessel worthy of hosting a god's presence. The colors and designs they used were not selected for aesthetic appeal, but were dictated by ancient theological texts and tradition, each to a precise frequency in their communication with the divine. For ceremonies dedicated to a sun god like Ra or Amun, a priest's entire face might be painted with a gleaming gold paste, his skin transformed to mimic the imperishable, radiant flesh of the deity. This was more than imitation, it was a profound act of sympathetic magic, aligning the priest's very being with the celestial power he was meant to channel. For rituals involving Osiris, the god of resurrection, stripes of vibrant green malachite would be carefully painted on the neck and over the heart, directly invoking his regenerative power. A priestess serving Hathor, the mistress of cosmetics, would adorn her eyes with the most dramatic swoops of kohl, but might also delicately trace the patterns of a beaded net dress across her chest and shoulders in blue lapis lazuli, mirroring the goddess's own attire. Every design was a coded language, a direct reflection of the gods' attributes, ensuring their appearance was a perfect echo of the divinity they served. This meticulous adornment served a triple purpose: to please the god, to protect the priest, and to maintain the fundamental concept of cosmic order, truth, and balance that was the bedrock of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians believed the universe was in a constant state of flux, threatened by the forces of chaos, or Isfet. The daily temple rituals, performed by these perfectly prepared priests, were the primary mechanism for pushing back against this entropy and upholding Ma'at. When a priest, his body shaved, anointed with sacred oils, and painted as a living image of the god, stood before the cult statue to present offerings, he was performing a cosmic duty. His flawless appearance was a critical part of the ritual's efficacy. A smudged kohl line, a faded pigment, or an unshaven eyebrow was not a simple cosmetic flaw. It was a ritual impurity that could offend the god, render the ceremony ineffective, and potentially weaken the protective order of the entire kingdom. Their vanity was, in the truest sense, a sacred science. The tools they used for this transformation were themselves considered sacred objects, kept within the temple precincts and handled with reverence. They had their own dedicated cosmetic kits, often made of finer materials than even the nobility possessed alabaster jars for oils, ivory pots for Kohl, and applicators carved from hippopotamus teeth. These items were used solely for their temple duties and were never taken home, remaining as pure the space they served. The act of applying this ritual makeup was often accompanied by specific hymns or spells, whispered invocations that activated the pigment's spiritual power, turning the paste and powder into a potent medium of divine connection. For these men and women, the mirror was not for vanity. It was a final check, a last assurance that the vessel was spotless, the symbols were correct, and the god would find their appearance a pleasing and worthy receptacle. In the hushed anticipation before the ceremony began, the only sound might be the soft click of an alabaster lid closing, the final act in a preparation that balanced the fate of the world on the edge of a coal stick. And no figure in all of ancient history embodies this perfect fusion of ritual, vanity, and power more completely than the last pharaoh of Egypt herself, Queen Cleopatra VII. When we picture her, we see those legendary, kohl-rimmed eyes, a vision of authority and allure that has captivated the world for millennia, but to view her beauty rituals as mere vanity is to miss their true genius. For Cleopatra, every ounce of fragrant unguent, every stroke of dark pigment, was a calculated act of statecraft, a deliberate performance designed to project an image of divine power that was both politically shrewd and spiritually absolute. She was the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, and her famous cosmetic routines were the tools she used to make that identity undeniable to her people and her rivals. Consider her most iconic feature, those dramatically lined, almond-shaped eyes. For any other Egyptian, this was a protective prayer to Horus. For Cleopatra, it was also a political statement. By perfecting this quintessentially Egyptian style, she visually rooted her claim to the throne, presenting herself not as a foreign Greek interloper from the Ptolemaic dynasty, but as a true daughter of Egypt, steeped in its ancient traditions and beloved by its gods. Her kohl would have been of the finest imported galena, mixed with precious oils and applied with implements of ivory or gold, a display of immense wealth that reinforced her royal status. But the message went deeper than opulence. The wedged eye she painted was a promise to her subjects. She was their protector, the living Horus on earth, whose vigilant gaze would guard the kingdom from the chaos of Roman invasion and internal strife. Her makeup was her crown, and her face was her throne. Her legendary skincare rituals, like the famous milk and honey baths attributed to her, also served this dual purpose. While the lactic acid in sour milk would have acted as a gentle exfoliant, and the honey as a natural antibacterial humectant, providing tangible benefits for her skin, the act itself was pure political theater. These were not quick, private dips. They were surely lavish, ceremonial affairs. Imagine the scene, the queen bathing in a pool of ass's milk, attended by servants, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of rare oils. This was a performance of almost unimaginable luxury and privilege, a display of wealth so immense it became a symbol of her power and her connection to the divine. In a land where milk was associated with the goddess Isis, who used it to nourish her son Horus, Cleopatra's bath transformed a skincare treatment into a sacred rite, aligning her bodily essence with that of the mother goddess herself. Perhaps her most potent tool was scent. Ancient historians like Plutarch wrote extensively of her mastery of perfumery, noting that she impregnated the sails of her royal barge with such captivating fragrances that Mark Antony could smell her approach across the water before he could see her. This was no mere preference for pleasant aromas. It was psychological warfare and divine propaganda. The scent she favored, likely the sacred Kaiphai incense of the temples, the lotus blossom sacred to Hathor, and the priceless myrrh imported from Punt, were the very sweat of the god. To be enveloped in this cloud of divinity was to become indistinguishable from a deity. When she first met Julius Caesar, she was said to have been rolled into his presence, hidden within a luxurious carpet. As the rug unrolled, she would have emerged not just as a beautiful woman, but as a breathtaking sensory experience, a vision of perfect Egyptian artistry, smelling of the gods themselves. It was a calculated entrance designed to overwhelm the senses and command awe. In every aspect of her adorned life, Cleopatra weaponized the ancient rituals of the beauty regime. Her carefully constructed image was her strongest shield and her most effective diplomat. She used cosmetics not to conceal, but to reveal her divine right to rule. In a world where Rome sought to reduce Egypt to just another province, she presented herself as its timeless, eternal heart, a goddess queen whose power was as palpable as the kohl on her eyelids and as persistent as the sacred perfume in her hair. She understood that true authority lies in the perception of the people, and she mastered the art of making the spiritual tangible, painting her legitimacy onto her very skin for all the world to see and believe. From their earliest days, the children of ancient Egypt were brought into this world of sacred adornment, their small faces touched with the same pigments that protected kings. This is not a practice of indulgence, but a vital initiation, a way of weaving the next generation into the very fabric of cultural and spiritual life. Imagine a mother sitting with her young daughter or son, not with a play vanity set, but with a real miniature cosmetic palette. She would gently apply the dark kohl around their eyes, a daily ritual that was as much about imparting a worldview as it was about safeguarding their health. From the moment a child could sit still, they learned that the body was a canvas to be respected, protected, and sanctified, a lesson written in soot and malachite. This early socialization is powerfully illustrated by the artifacts left behind. Archaeologists have discovered tiny cosmetic sets in domestic settings, clearly designed for small hands. These were not toys in the modern sense of being pretend. They were functional, scaled-down versions of adult kits. A child might have their own small, undecorated clay pot for kohl, a modest wooden applicator stick, and perhaps a little polishing cloth. The act of a parent gifting such a set was a significant milestone, a passing of the torch that said, "You are now old enough to participate in the rituals that keep us safe and connected to the gods." Through this daily practice, children internalized the values of their culture, the importance of ritual purity, the necessity of divine protection, and the understanding that their personal care was a contribution to the community's overall well-being. The most visible symbol of this childhood initiation was the distinctive side lock of youth. Young boys and girls often had their heads shaved for hygiene, save for one long, braided lock of hair that was left to grow on the side of their head. This was not just a cute hairstyle, it was a powerful identifier, immediately marking the child as being under the protection of the child god Horus the Younger, or Harpocrates as the Greeks later called him. This god was often depicted as a nude youth with his finger to his lips in a gesture of silence and innocence, and crucially, with the same single lock of hair. By mirroring this divine attribute, parents were placing their children under the god's direct guardianship. The side lock was a public declaration of vulnerability and divinity, a plea to the community and the gods to watch over this young life. The application of makeup to a child, therefore, carried layers of meaning beyond the physical. A parent carefully drawing the Eye of Horus on their child was performing a profound act of love and prayer. They were invoking the gods to watch over their most precious possession, creating a visible shield against the unseen dangers of the world, both the spiritual evil eye and the very real threats of infection and disease. This ritual forged a powerful emotional bond, a shared moment of tenderness and protection that reinforced family ties. The child, in turn, learned to associate the feeling of the cool kohl paste and the scent of sacred oils with safety, parental love, and their place within a protective cosmic order. It was a sensory education in what it meant to be Egyptian. The transition out of childhood was also marked by these rituals of adornment. The cutting of the side lock was a major coming-of-age ceremony, a symbolic shedding of childhood protections as the adolescent stepped more fully into adult responsibilities. A girl might receive her first full-sized bronze mirror and a more elaborate cosmetic set, while a boy might be given a razor for his own shaving ritual. These gifts signaled that they were now expected to maintain their own ritual purity and manage their own divine protection. The lessons learned at their parents' knee, how to properly grind the pigment, how to apply the lines with intention, how to anoint themselves with oil, were now their own daily duty. This seamless progression from observed ritual to personal practice ensured the continuity of culture, generation after generation, with every pot of kohl and every stroke of the applicator stick. But these sacred rituals of beauty and protection required a steady supply of precious materials, sparking an economic engine that reached across continents and defined empires. The quest for the perfect galena for Kohl or the purest malachite for green eyeshadow was not a simple matter of local sourcing. It was a complex, state-controlled operation that drove exploration, forged international alliances, and filled the pharaoh's treasuries. Imagine the caravans, stretching like ants across the desert, their precious cargo not of gold or jewels for a king's crown, but of minerals and resins for his people's faces. The most essential ingredient, the deep black galena for Kohl, was primarily mined in the rugged deserts of the Sinai Peninsula. These were not casual dig sites, but major industrial operations, with pharaohs from the earliest dynasties sending well-organized expeditions, complete with miners, soldiers, and scribes to account for every ounce of ore extracted. Control over these mines was so vital that they were often depicted in temple reliefs as great military achievements. Their conquests equated with bringing order to chaos, much like the protective Kohl itself was meant to do. The vibrant green malachite, sacred to Hathor and Osiris, came from a different direction entirely, sourced from the eastern deserts and the land of Nubia to the south. Securing these veins of brilliant green stone required not just mining expertise, but also delicate diplomacy and sometimes outright military campaigns to subdue local chieftains and secure the trade routes. The pharaohs didn't just want access, they demanded monopolistic control, understanding that whoever controlled the source of these divine pigments held immense power. But the true markers of extreme luxury, the ingredients that separated the nobility from the commoners, were the fragrant resins, frankincense, and myrrh. These were not native to Egypt's fertile valley and had to be imported from the distant, almost mythical land of Punt, a place believed to be near modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. Organizing an expedition to Punt was akin to funding a mission to the moon today. It was a colossal undertaking requiring massive seafaring vessels, months of travel, and immense risk. The famous reliefs at Pharaoh Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri vividly document her successful expedition, showing the Egyptian ships returning laden with living frankincense trees, sacks of resin, ivory, gold, and exotic animal skins. This was not merely trade, it was a spectacular display of a pharaoh's power to command the very forces of nature and geography to obtain the sweat of the gods. This thriving economy of beauty created specialized professions and entire industries. There were the miners, braving dangerous conditions to extract the raw ores. Then came the grinders and processors, who used stone mortars and pestles to crush the minerals into impossibly fine powders, a skill that determined the quality and smoothness of the final product. Artisans crafted the exquisite containers, the alabaster jars, faience pots, and ivory tubes that were as valuable as the content they held. Merchants and traders managed the distribution networks, moving these goods from the remote mines and ports to the bustling marketplaces of Thebes and Memphis. The state tightly regulated this entire chain, often taxing the goods heavily and storing vast surpluses in temple and royal granaries alongside stocks of grain. A pharaoh's wealth was measured not just in gold, but in the number of jars of precious kyphite incense and sacks of galena ore he possessed. These commodities were so valuable, they were used as currency in international diplomacy, gifted by the pharaoh to foreign dignitaries to secure loyalty or to smooth over negotiations, a practice demonstrating that the power of cosmetics extended far beyond Egypt's borders, influencing the political landscape of the entire ancient Near East. In the world of ancient Egyptian romance, cosmetics were far more than a simple enhancement. They were a potent language of desire, an essential tool in the delicate dance of courtship and the sacred bond of marriage. This was a culture that celebrated love and physical attraction with a refreshing frankness, and their beauty rituals were deeply woven into this pursuit of connection. Young men and women didn't just want to look attractive, they sought to transform themselves into walking incarnations of the gods of love and sensuality, primarily the goddess Hathor. To anoint oneself with her sacred green malachite, or to line the eyes in the shape adored by Horus, was to directly channel their divine power of attraction, making oneself irresistible not just to a mortal partner, but aligning one's allure with the very forces that move the universe. We can hear this intimate connection between makeup and passion echoed in the beautiful love poetry that has survived for millennia. In these verses, lovers don't just praise each other's natural beauty, they specifically celebrate the artful application of cosmetics. One young man sings of his beloved, saying, "I behold how her eyes sparkle with kohl, a look that captivates my heart." Another poem describes a lover's hair as being laden with perfume, and her arms as dazzling with gold. These weren't casual compliments. They were acknowledgments of the time, skill, and sacred intention she had invested in her appearance, specifically for him. The perfectly applied makeup was a signal of interest and respect, a visual promise that she considered him worthy of her most divine and perfected self. For a man to appear before his beloved with gleaming, oiled skin and kohl-lined eyes was his own offering, a demonstration that he, too, understood the rituals of attraction and wished to present himself as a worthy, protected, and godlike partner. This pursuit of allure was supported by a rich tradition of cosmeceutical recipes specifically designed for romance. The Ebers Papyrus and other medical texts contain numerous prescriptions for appealing to the heart, which was a common euphemism for winning affection. These were not simple makeup recipes. They were complex magical potions meant to be applied to the skin. One such recipe might involve grinding a special mineral with honey and milk to create a scented lotion that would make the skin irresistibly soft and sweet-smelling. Another might involve infusing a high-quality oil with the fragrance of blue lotus blossoms, believed to be a mild aphrodisiac, and mandrake root, which was associated with love and desire. These concoctions blended practical skincare with sympathetic magic. The honey made the skin smooth, but its sweetness was also meant to metaphorically sweeten the disposition of the desired person. A man or woman would anoint their wrists, neck, and chest with these potions before a social gathering, believing the fragrance itself carried a magical compulsion, drawing their beloved to them as surely as a flower draws a bee. The ultimate expression of this romantic adornment was, of course, the wedding. On this momentous day, the cosmetic rituals reached their peak, transforming the couple into living deities. The bride would be prepared by her female relatives in an elaborate ceremony. Her body would be scrubbed with natron salt for ritual purity, then anointed from head to toe with the most precious oils, infused with frankincense and myrrh. Her hairstyle would be intricate, often involving braids woven with golden threads and beads of turquoise. Her eyes would be lined with the darkest kohl, extending into dramatic wings, and her lips and cheeks would be stained a vibrant red with ochre. This final touch of red was critically important, as it symbolized the life-giving blood of the goddess Isis, and was a powerful invocation for fertility and a healthy family. The goal was to make her a living image of Hathor, the goddess of love, so that the gods would look upon the union with favor. The groom underwent a similar, though perhaps less elaborate, transformation. He too would be cleansed and anointed, his hair styled and his eyes lined. For him, the makeup emphasized his role as the embodiment of Horus, the protector and strong partner. Together, the perfectly adorned couple represented the divine marriage of Horus and Hathor, a microcosm of the cosmic order their union was meant to perpetuate. The cosmetics they wore were a prayer made visible, a spell for happiness, fertility, and stability cast upon their own skin. After the ceremony, they would exchange gifts, and among the most common and meaningful were personal cosmetic items, an exquisite ivory kohl tube from him, a beautifully carved perfume spoon from her. These were not just practical gifts, they were promises. They said, "I will continue to strive to be beautiful for you. I will maintain my health and protection for our shared life. I will honor our bond with the same sacred rituals that began it." Their shared vanity case became a cornerstone of their new household, a daily reminder of the divine attraction that brought them together and the shared rituals that would keep them united. This profound and ancient connection between beauty and belief, however, would not remain untouched by time. As the power of the pharaohs waned and new empires cast their shadow over the Nile, the very meaning behind the makeup began to transform. The arrival of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE and the subsequent rise of the Ptolemaic dynasty, followed by the eventual absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, ushered in a new era of cultural fusion. Greek philosophers and Roman soldiers walked the streets of Alexandria, bringing with them vastly different worldviews that prized humanism, individualism, and personal vanity in ways that were distinct from the Egyptian focus on collective cosmic order. This collision of cultures didn't erase the Egyptian cosmetic tradition. Instead, it reframed it, pulling the rituals of the vanity case away from the altar and closer to the mirror for its own sake. One of the most visible signs of this shift was in the styles themselves. The iconic heavy-winged Eye of Horus, once a sacred, non-negotiable form, began to soften and change. Greek and Roman aesthetics favored a more natural, less dramatically lined look, focusing on enhancing one's own features rather than transforming them into a divine symbol. We see this evolution in the famous Fayum mummy portraits from the Roman period, which depict the deceased with a stunning realism. Their eyes are still defined, a nod to the enduring tradition, but the lines are subtler, more blended, designed to flatter the individual's face rather than to paint a universal amulet. Hairstyles, too, became a major focus of this new vanity. Elaborate Roman-style curls and braids, often incorporating hairpieces and extensions, began to rival the traditional Egyptian wigs. The goal was no longer just ritual purity or emulating a goddess, but to be seen as fashionable, sophisticated, and aligned with the latest trends emanating from Rome, the new center of imperial power. The very ingredients in the makeup pots began to tell a story of changing values and global trade. While traditional galena and malachite were still used, new substances flooded the market, driven by Roman tastes and their vast trade networks. The Roman elite had a notorious fondness for a stark, white face powder, often made from a base of chalk or lead carbonate. This was a look associated with the life of leisure, signaling that one was wealthy enough to stay indoors and not labor under the sun. In cosmopolitan cities like Alexandria, Egyptian women of means began to adopt this pallid complexion, using it as a new status symbol. For rouge, they might seek out expensive red ochres from Spain or vermilion imported from mines in Anatolia, valuing them for their vibrant color and exotic origin rather than any connection to the blood of Isis. The makeup was becoming a commodity, its value measured more by its cost and rarity than its spiritual potency. This is not to say that the old ways vanished entirely. The deep-seated beliefs of millennia could not be erased by a few centuries of foreign rule. Instead, they persisted in a fascinating, layered coexistence. An Egyptian woman in this period might very well apply her Kohl in the morning with a whispered prayer to Hathor for protection, a personal habit born of faith and tradition. Then, she might carefully layer a fashionable white Roman powder over her face to meet her friends at the agora, a social performance meant to convey her modern, cosmopolitan identity. The same tomb could contain a mummy adorned with the traditional green stripes of Osiris for resurrection, yet be accompanied by a portrait panel showing the deceased in the latest Roman hairstyle and jewelry. They lived in a dual world, navigating between the enduring spiritual framework of their ancestors and the compelling new culture of their rulers. The industry of beauty itself was transformed by this new demand. While temple workshops had once controlled the production of the finest, richly pure cosmetics, the market now expanded to include a plethora of private merchants catering to personal taste. Greek and Roman perfumers brought their own techniques, creating new, complex scent profiles that competed with the sacred kyphi of the temples. Makeup became more accessible and commercially driven, with a wider range of quality available, from the exquisite and expensive imported powders for the elite to cheaper, locally made imitations for the common citizen. The act of purchasing makeup shifted from a solemn acquisition of sacred tools to a more mundane consumer experience. The container itself, once an amulet inscribed with prayers, might now be a finely blown glass bottle from a Syrian workshop or a ceramic pot stamped with a Roman merchant's mark, valued for its craftsmanship rather than its incantations. This period represents a pivotal moment in the history of beauty, a slow turning of the tide where the cosmic began to share space with the cosmetic. The sacred rituals of protection and divinity which had for so long been the sole purpose of adornment, were now joined by a powerful new impulse: the desire for individual expression, social status, and personal appeal. The Egyptian mastery of makeup, born in the temples and tombs, was now being repackaged for the forums and villas of a New World order. It was a testament to the adaptability of Egyptian culture that it could absorb these influences without being completely subsumed by them, creating a unique and hybrid beauty standard that looked back to the gods of the Nile while simultaneously gazing into the polished bronze mirror of a rapidly changing world. For centuries, the only hints of these elaborate rituals were the stylized images on tomb walls and the descriptions in hieroglyphic texts. The true depth of the Egyptian cosmetic spirit remained locked away, a beautiful mystery. Then came the spade and the trowel, the careful brush of the archaeologist, and finally, the powerful lens of the modern scientist. These tools have not just confirmed the ancient stories, they have brought them to life in vivid, tangible detail, allowing us to almost hear the click of an alabaster lid closing over 3,000 years ago. One of the most profound windows into this everyday divinity came from a place not of pharaohs, but of artisans, the village of Deir el-Medina. This was a special, walled community built to house the skilled craftsmen and artists who carved and painted the royal tombs in the Valley of the King. Their homes, abandoned and preserved by the desert sand, became a time capsule of domestic life. Here, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary: the actual personal vanity kits of these middle-class workers, left exactly as they were the day their owners walked out the door. In the compact, mud-brick houses, they found small cosmetic chests containing everything needed for the daily ritual. There were the simple, undecorated clay pots still holding a residue of dark Kohl paste. There were the smooth, worn applicator sticks, their ends rounded from years of use. They found grinding palettes stained with the faint green of malachite and the red of ochre. These weren't the lavish golden sets of a Tutankhamun. These were the working tools of real people. Finding them in a domestic setting proved beyond any doubt that this was not a practice reserved for the elite or only for burial. This was a deeply integrated part of daily existence, a non-negotiable act of preparation that began each morning for men, women, and children alike, right in the heart of their own homes. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes not from the pots themselves, but from what was left on the skin of the people who used them. The advancement of scientific techniques like scanning electron microscopy and X-ray diffraction has allowed researchers to analyze the minuscule residues found on the edges of cosmetic containers, on applicator sticks, and even directly on the hair and skin of well-preserved mummies. This isn't just about identifying ingredients, it's about reverse engineering the sacred recipes. Scientists can now look at a 3,000-year-old smear of coal and break it down to its molecular components, revealing the exact blend of minerals, the binding agents used, and even the trace elements that point to its geographic origin. This chemical fingerprint tells a story of sophisticated industry and long-distance trade networks dedicated to beauty. A fascinating example of this emerged from the analysis of a coal sample from a mummy in the Louvre Museum. The scientific breakdown revealed it was primarily made from laurianite and phosgenite, two lead base minerals. This was a stunning discovery. These are not minerals that occur naturally in a ready-to-use form. They are synthetic compounds that must be carefully manufactured through a complex chemical process involving wet chemistry. This means the ancient Egyptians weren't just digging up galena and grinding it. They were, in essence, early chemists, intentionally creating specific lead chloride compounds in laboratory-like conditions because they had empirically discovered that these synthetic versions were smoother, had better coverage, and provided more effective medicinal and protective properties than the raw ore. Their spiritual practice was backed by a startlingly advanced scientific understanding. This scientific detective work has also been applied to the famous red lips of the mummies. Residue analysis from containers and from the mouths of mummies has shown that the red pigment was indeed red ochre, but it was almost always mixed with a base of animal fat or plant oil. This created a long-lasting lip stain or bum. Furthermore, testing has revealed that these mixtures often contain traces of myrrh or frankincense. This adds a whole new sensory dimension to our understanding. It means that when an Egyptian applied their makeup, they weren't just engaging the sense of sight, they were also surrounded by a cloud of sacred fragrance. The act of beautification was a full-body, multi-sensory experience designed to please the gods through every possible avenue. Each scientific discovery peels back another layer, moving us from seeing these artifacts as simple objects to understanding them as the central components of a living, breathing, and deeply spiritual daily practice that connected the individual to the cosmos with every single application. It's a common and understandable assumption to look at these elaborate Egyptian beauty rituals and see a culture obsessed with vanity, a society where appearance was everything. We might even project our own modern anxieties about beauty standards onto them, imagining a world where looking perfect was a relentless social pressure. But to dismiss their practices as mere vanity is to completely miss the point and to overlook the profound complexity of their worldview. The ancient Egyptians would likely be baffled by our separation of the spiritual from the cosmetic. For them, there was no such divide. Every stroke of Kohl, every scented unguent, was a multilayered act that served the body, the community, and the soul simultaneously. Consider the very word we often use for such practices, vanity. It implies a self-absorbed focus on superficial appearance. The Egyptian motivation could not have been more different. Their goal was not to stand out as an individual for personal admiration, but to fit in to align themselves perfectly with the divine and social order. A perfectly painted eye was not about attracting human attention. It was about commanding the attention of the gods and repelling the attention of evil spirits. It was an act of conformity to a cosmic ideal, not an expression of individualistic pride. A person who neglected their appearance was not just unkempt, they were spiritually vulnerable, socially irresponsible, and physically at risk. Their meticulous adornment was, in a very real sense, a civic and religious duty. The evidence for this is not hidden, it's inscribed on their temples and buried in their tomb. Medical papyri, like the extensive Ebers papyrus, don't relegate cosmetics to a separate chapter on beauty. Instead, recipes for Kohl and salves are listed alongside treatments for wounds and diseases. A single entry might detail how to mix a paste for eye ailments using galena, treating a bacterial infection and invoking the protection of Horus in the same breath. The instructions are matter of fact, blending practical steps with spiritual incantations. A recipe isn't complete until it includes the words to be spoken during application, transforming the user into a healer and a priest of their own body. These texts make it clear that the pharmacy and the vanity case were one and the same drawer. The artifacts themselves shout this truth. We find Kohl pots not just on the elegant dressing tables of queens, but in the humble graves of laborers and even children. This universal practice cuts directly against the notion of vanity as a mark of elite privilege. A cheap, undecorated clay Kohl tube placed in a child's tomb wasn't about ensuring the child looked beautiful for eternity in a superficial sense. It was a desperate, loving prayer from a grieving parent, a final piece of essential equipment to protect their child's vulnerable soul on its dangerous journey through the afterlife. They were equipping their child with the only protection they knew, the same protection they used every day on Earth. The context transforms the object from a vanity item into a profound artifact of faith and love. Perhaps the most powerful argument against the vanity label is the simple fact that men participated in these rituals just as fully as women, and often more visibly. In our modern framework, we often wrongly associate cosmetics primarily with femininity. In ancient Egypt, this gendered divide simply did not apply. The most iconic images of dramatic eye makeup are of male pharaohs like Tutankhamun and Ramses the Great. Their elaborate makeup was a core component of their official divine regalia. A pharaoh appearing without his signature Kohl would be as unthinkable as him appearing without his crown or scepter. For the male priests, shaving their entire bodies and applying specific pigments was a strict requirement for entering the sacred temple precincts, a sign of ritual purity necessary to approach the god. This wasn't about looking attractive, it was about achieving a state of holiness. Their appearance was a uniform, a badge of office that communicated their power, their piety, and their role as protectors of the cosmic balance. To reduce this intricate, meaningful system to mere vanity is to apply a shallow, modern lens to a deeply spiritual ancient culture. It ignores the overwhelming evidence that they saw their bodies as vessels to be perfected, protected, and offered up to the divine. The true vanity, in a way, would have been to ignore these rituals, to believe that one's natural, unprotected self was sufficient to face the gods and the dangers of the world. Their daily transformation was an acknowledgement of human vulnerability and a celebration of the human ability to bridge the gap between the mortal and the eternal. They understood something we have largely forgotten, that the pursuit of beauty, when rooted in spirituality and community, is not about concealing the self, but about revealing its highest, most protected, and most connected potential. That legacy of divine protection in everyday science did not vanish with the sands of time. It echoes in the swipe of a modern liquid eyeliner and the crush of a mineral eyeshadow pan today. The most direct and undeniable thread connecting our world to ancient Thebes is the timeless, iconic cat eye. When a beauty enthusiast today carefully extends that sharp, black wing from their lash line, they are, whether they know it or not, tracing the ghost of the wedge-head eye. The shape is identical, a tribute to a 3,000-year-old design for divine protection. The modern iteration might be achieved with a precise felt tip instead of a carved ivory stick, and the motivation may be more about aesthetic appeal than warding off evil spirits, but the visual language remains powerfully unchanged. It's a testament to the Egyptians' genius that they created a form of adornment so inherently striking and flattering that its power transcends its original sacred purpose, enduring as a universal symbol of glamour and strength across millennia. Beyond the shape, the very substances we prize in our makeup bags pay homage to Egyptian innovation. The modern shift towards clean beauty and mineral-based cosmetics is, in a way, a return to their ancient apothecary. Today, we seek out products with ingredients like malachite and lapis lazuli for their vibrant pigments and natural origins, touting their benefits for sensitive skin. The Egyptians would have understood this perfectly. They were the original pioneers of mineral makeup, grinding these very stones into their palettes. They intuitively knew what we now confirm in labs, that these earth-derived minerals offered color, coverage, and crucially, medicinal properties. Our contemporary fascination with natural oils, like castor, moringa, and almond oil for hair and skincare directly mirrors their daily anointing rituals. They use these oils as protective barriers against the harsh climate, and we now value them for their moisturizing and nourishing properties. The tools have been refined, and the packaging is sleeker, but the fundamental philosophy of using the earth's bounty for nourishment and adornment is a direct inheritance from the Nile. This connection raises a profound question about our own values. The ancient Egyptian beauty ritual was profoundly communal and spiritual. Applying makeup was an act of aligning oneself with the gods, protecting the community from chaos, and ensuring the stability of the cosmos. It was outwardly focused, a contribution to a larger whole. In stark contrast, much of modern beauty culture is inwardly focused, centered on the individual. Our rituals are often about self-expression, boosting personal confidence, or conforming to social trends. We seek products that promise to make us look younger, feel more attractive, or express our unique identity. The shared sacred purpose has been largely replaced by a personal, and often commercial, one. We have mastered the Egyptian how but have largely lost sight of their why. Our vanities are filled with the descendants of their sacred tools, but they often serve a more solitary god, the self. Yet, perhaps there are still glimpses of that ancient magic in our modern routines. Think about the feeling of putting on a power lipstick before a big presentation. Isn't that a faint echo of channeling the confidence of a goddess? Or consider the mindful, almost meditative ritual of a detailed skincare routine at the end of a long day, a small act of self-care that restores a sense of order and calm. In these moments, we are not so far from the Egyptian who used their daily ritual to restore ma'at, or balance, to their world. We may not believe our eyeliner protects us from evil spirits, but we do believe it armors us against the judgment of the world and our own insecurities. The vessel and the action remain eerily similar. we have simply secularized the faith. The enduring power of these rituals suggests a deep human need that transcends time, the need to transform ourselves, to define our identity through our appearance, and to face the world feeling prepared, protected, and powerful. The ancient Egyptians simply had a much richer, more integrated vocabulary for it, one where the sacred and the cosmetic were one and the same. So as we've journeyed from the banks of the Nile to the dressing tables of today, it becomes clear that to label the ancient Egyptian relationship with makeup as mere vanity is to profoundly misunderstand it. Theirs was a holistic practice, a brilliant and inseparable fusion of science and spirit, the medical and the magical, the personal and the profound. That simple Kohl pot on a merchant shelf was, in reality, a portable pharmacy, a personal amulet, a divine offering, and a statement of identity, all contained within a single, humble vessel. They understood something we are only now relearning, that caring for the vessel of the body is not a superficial act, but a sacred one. It is an acknowledgement that our physical well-being is intrinsically linked to our spiritual and emotional state, and that the rituals we perform upon ourselves can have the power to protect, to heal, and to transform us from the inside out. Their legacy challenges us to look at our own daily routines with fresh eyes. That morning ritual of yours, the splash of water on the face, the application of a moisturizer, the swipe of lip balm, what is it, truly? Is it just a mindless habit, a chore to be completed before rushing out the door? Or is it, perhaps, a modern echo of that ancient desire for protection and preparation? What if we approach these small actions with a fraction of the intention that an ancient Egyptian did? Not to invoke Horus or Hathor, necessarily, but to consciously set an intention for the day, to armor ourselves against the glare of our digital screens as they did against the desert sun, to create a moment of quiet focus and self-care before the world demands our attention. The tools have changed, but the fundamental human need for a ritual that centers and protects us remains utterly unchanged. This brings us to a final, parting thought. We've explored the protective Kohl of Horus, the regenerative green of Osiris, the sacred scents of the temples, and the elaborate wigs that signified status and purity. Each facet reveals a culture that saw no divide between the beautiful and the beneficial, the glamorous and the godly. Their entire philosophy was built on the principle of connection, connecting the individual to the community, the living to the dead, and humanity to the divine through the powerful, universal language of adornment. They crafted a world where every painted line and every scented oil was a thread in a larger tapestry of meaning, weaving each person into a story much bigger than themselves. Now we turn the mirror towards you. After this journey into the heart of ancient Egyptian mystery, which aspect of their cosmetic world captivated your imagination the most? Was it the startlingly advanced science behind their lead-based Kohl that inadvertently protected them from infection? The profound spiritual belief that they could literally draw God's protection onto their skin? Or perhaps the powerful idea that these rituals of beauty were a universal language, spoken equally by men and women, pharaohs and farmers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We've built this channel on a shared curiosity for the mysteries of the past, and your perspective is a vital part of the conversation. Let us know what you found most fascinating, and as always, thank you for exploring the hidden depths of history with us.